Hello, thanks everyone for joining us for the first Sifted Talks of the year in partnership with Vanta. We're going to be discussing how to find and then maintain product market fit, as well as cover strategy as you scale and when to pivot and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, one of our panelists, Merva Iqbal, the CEO and co-founder of parcel delivery network Hived, has had to drop out because of illness. I know you probably saw her face on the marketing material and stuff, but yeah, unfortunately, Merva has had to drop out. But joining me for today's panel are Rhiannon White, the CEO of Clue, period tracking app founded in 2012. So Rhiannon was the chief product officer at the company between 2022 and 2024, and more recently took on the CEO role at the end of last year. Alex Weber, who is a scout investor for Sequoia Capital, but was also the head of growth at German neobank N26, which was founded in 2013, and Alex spent a good number of years there from 2014 to around 2023 in various roles, so super experienced. On the operator side of things, he's also building in stealth at the moment, so has a good perspective on the very, very early stages and what you have to think about as a founder. And Paulo Rodriguez, the VP of product at Vanta, a company offering compliance automation. So a couple of housekeeping rules before we dig in. Please submit questions you have for our panelists throughout the Q&A using the Q&A function that you will see on your screens. And these can be upvoted throughout the discussion, which will be around an hour. There won't be a standalone Q&A at the end of the panel. So if you have questions, please do submit them during the conversation and I will pick up the ones that are voted up the most. So let's dig in. I want to start in the early days, and Alex, I'm going to come to you in a second to kick us off. So thinking about product market fit and what you're actually looking for, talk to us about that sort of inception stage, the very, very early stage. How do you even start to think about this?
Yeah, happy to kick us off. Thanks for inviting me and the others for this exciting conversation. I mean, I think what's very important these days is, as you know, startups are definitely in a different level than they were 10 years ago with regard to, you know, how many people aspire to be entrepreneurs, how many people are aspiring to build, the readiness of venture capital for early stage startups. There is a plethora of entrepreneurs that go into the market and seek out opportunities, which I think is wonderful because we need a generation of excellent entrepreneurs to address some of the biggest problems of our day and age and of our time. But at the same time, that also means the rules of the game have changed a bit. And, you know, you have more competition as an early stage founder looking into a problem. And so you need to de-risk the assumptions of your business model a lot, maybe more rigorously and a lot faster than maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And so from my point of view, there is almost a phase before finding product market fit that is identifying problem solution fit, which basically means, you know, if you start out as an entrepreneur and you say you want to build a business, then first of all, have you really understood a problem worth solving? Have you really understood a problem that's also big enough to build a sustainable company off the back of that? And is the solution that you are proposing like the right one for that problem? And I, as you alluded to, I'm sort of in that very early days. And one thing that I found is that anyone you talk to about, oh yeah, I want to start a company and I want to build this, they immediately jump to the solution. They're like, well, okay, and what's the product? What's the solution? And I think it's very important as an entrepreneur to persevere that urge, also maybe as an entrepreneur who's building in a space where you feel maybe you are also a customer, you understand the problem, okay, here's the solution, to really, you know, take a step back and rigorously focus on this problem solution fit phase where you go into user research and really deeply understand the problem before diving into solutioning, so to speak, right? And so I think that's something that probably differentiates the good from the great entrepreneurs and can help you to avoid like lots of sunk cost. If you just start building something you haven't validated, you will quickly run out of that early money and basically not really make it. Maybe as a starting point, happy to expand a bit more on what to look for in problem solution fit, but maybe just to set the scene.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for that. I was going to ask how are you doing that at the moment? What are there frameworks you're going to? Are there key questions you're asking yourself? Like, what are you actually doing at the moment to get to that point?
Yeah. I mean, for me, the let's say when do you know you've achieved problem solution fit? That's sort of the guiding questions that I'm currently following and trying to within a 3-month time frame. Now that I've assembled the right team to help me with this, that's what we're going after. So the 3 questions that I'm looking at is, and that comes I think from the IDEO framework of innovation or finding great ideas, is it desirable for the customer? Yeah. So how do you know you have reached desirability? is when you can repeatedly get customers to a point where they are wanting to switch from an existing alternative to a promise that you're making. That doesn't mean you've built a product yet. That means you have done research so well that if you then pitch to a customer a potential product, like a hypothetical solution, they are excited and they want to sign up to it. So that means you have figured out desirability. And then the second point on viability, because it's also important that you think about our entire business model. So it's not about just, someone is only a customer if they are paying for your product at the end of the day. And that's sort of our responsibility also to make sure there's a sustainable business model behind to scale your impact over time. And so the point on viability comes in. Can you get customers to pre-commit? Can you get customers to prepay for this then solution that you will then go off and develop once you have, sufficient tangible commitments? Can you prepay? Can you get letters of intent? Maybe in a B2B setting, you have more of that sort of contractual setting with potential target customers you've identified. So those are the first two. And then feasibility. Have you understood what is the smallest possible thing that you can go out and build within, let's say, maybe 2 to 3 months from that point in time to actually deliver that core value that you have understood through your research? So those are the 3 core things from my perspective to think about, and that I'm currently working towards figuring out on my side.
And so you go through this process, you find problem, solution, fit, you start building. Obviously, at some point you have to sort of start mapping that sort of road to product market fit. Paulo, what does that look like?
Well, actually, if you don't mind, I want to ask something to Alex. I thought it was really interesting, the desirability piece. It's like, how do you show that, right? Because once you have a product, it's very easy to go and show mock-ups, but like you're ideating from scratch. Like how do you get people to visualize that idea that they want to see the service? Like, is it a deck pitch? Do you do mock-ups? Like how do you actually do that?
I love that question. It's something literally like for this week on my agenda. So for the next phase of user research, like what we're trying to do is, so you've been quite through the problem phase right now. So for me, the next phase now is to potentially hypothesize certain solutions and then provoke them out to get a response. So for example, you say, that's a specific aspect of the solution that you envision. And then you create, let's say, a mock-up or like a product brochure, if you want to call it like that, that would explain what does that feature do. And you provoke it, to really tease out a certain element that you're trying to prove. And then I think, we still need to discuss now with the team if we then create a fake landing page, or is it like a PowerPoint slide that explains the feature. But it's really something that you then put in front of the user to provoke a reaction. This is not yet a product that you will sell, but can I sit down with you, Paulo, next week and show you like 2 slides on something I have in mind to better understand your problem? In fact, I'm still understanding the problem by putting provocations in front of you, if that makes sense, right? And so by doing that, eventually in 2 months' time, hopefully I will have something that is a more complete proposition, also still on a, let's say, PowerPoint website mockup basis, that then maybe I come to you and say, you want to buy now? And then take it from there.
Yeah, and I think I really like the way you're thinking about it, because like you're not putting like a full solution, you're still doing the discovery piece. And I think that is something that, as we continue this conversation, like I've seen this continuous like search for, do I still have it? Do I still have it? Do I need to search more? Like you need to keep that curiosity mode on all the time. So I don't think product market fit is something that you reach and you can be like, cool, we're done. Like we can go home. Like it just needs to keep evolving.
Absolutely.
Amazing. I guess before we move on, also, I just want to jump in on something you said there too, Alex, which is like timelines for this sort of thing. If someone was in your position, what realistic time frame should they set themselves for doing this sort of work?
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, these early days is the principle is slow down to speed up later. I think this is the phase, where you set the compass. This is not a phase where the fastest wins, but the one who figures it out. And what is exactly the problem and how do you evolve the solution is something that it's really discovery, it's not execution. And so I think that's where it could take 3 months, it could take 6 months, it could maybe take 7 or 8 months. I think I try to think about it in in quarterly intervals. So I have a thesis and I say, okay, for this quarter, let's start from in this problem and evaluate it. And by the end of the quarter, let's see if we've reached desirability, viability, feasibility. Do we then pivot, persevere, or pause? And we'll get to that at the end as well. And if you are not there yet, maybe you need another quarter to discover that. And so, for example, a couple of companies I've also as a scout invested in, the best ones that are now very quickly reaching seed Series A are the ones that, for example, wrote the first line of code after 8 months, because they so clearly understood the problem. And then afterwards, you will speed up because you've done your homework, because you really understand the problem. And so I think obviously that depends. Do you have the resources, and have you raised maybe a small angel round that can sustain you, a designer, and maybe 1 or 2 people, and the user research costs? But if you can, I think this is a phase where it pays off to slow down to then speed up later.
I'm keen to move the conversation into that sort of path towards whether you actually have some sort of product market fit. Before we do that, Rhiannon and Paulo, do you have anything else to add to the points Alex has brought up?
No, I just want him to come out of his stealth to figure out what he's building.
+1.
Amazing. Paulo, I'm going to come to you because we spoke about this before the panel on that sort of roadmap to finding product market fit. Like, what are you thinking around that sort of question and topic?
Yeah, I think once you've had that kind of like phase where you're like, all right, cool, this is something worth solving and people are interested. I think that if you have a problem that is hard enough to solve, like you're in a really good space, right? Like you've done your first step, and then you need to keep evolving that. Like as we said, like this is all about continuous evolution. And I think one of the things that that I really like. So I've been like half my career in sales, half my career on the product side, right? So I've been in both worlds, and they're weirdly similar in a way, but they're vastly different. So I think one of the things that I've observed on the roadmap to product market fit is a really good interaction between sales and product teams as you start finding things that resonate. So once you start seeing some repeatable patterns and things that resonate, you keep that curiosity mode on. And then if you create a really good feedback loop between your product team and your sales team, which is very easy early on because it's probably the same person doing product and sales at the same time. Like then you start evolving your product, and as your customers are telling you, oh, I want it this way or I want it that way, then you figure out, okay, is what they're telling me the real thing, or there's something underneath that I need to solve in a slightly different way. And I think that for me is something that works incredibly well. Like, I mean, probably like the best example I've ever seen on this at Vanta. Like Vanta, which is today a complete automation software for compliance, it started up as a spreadsheet. Like, it was literally a spreadsheet that spit out a set of patterns and reports. But that was what helped people understand, okay, I have this massive problem that I don't know how to tackle, and you're selling me a spreadsheet that gives me this output. I'm willing to pay for that. Okay, we have something in here. What's the next iteration of this? Like, okay, we need to go and automate all these things in the product. And then as you keep evolving that, like it may take you a year, but you will keep evolving your product, and you're going to get it to product market fit because you have that constant feedback loop between what the market and the customers want and what you're building towards it.
As you were doing that, like how often were you talking to customers? What was happening? Like what was actually happening on while you were trying to get there?
Customers and products and sales are all in the same room all the time. Like, I mean, when you're a small company, it's very easy to do. I think the challenge becomes when you scale. Scaling up is way more complex. Doing it at 10x the scale. When you're 10 people, it's almost impossible not to have everybody in the same room. When you're 100 people, then it becomes way more complex. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle, because what was very easy in the early stages then becomes a complex thing to do, and people tend to deviate. Like from a sales perspective, things go one way. From a product perspective, things go the other way. So you just need to keep that constant, I would almost call it tension between your sales and your product teams, where sales oversells the product a bit, and it pushes product to go further, and then product sells something, builds something that sales don't want to sell, and it forces sales to get out of the comfort zone. And if you keep that tension going and keep listening to your customers, and you have that triad working all the time, you'll be in a good place.
So we're going to move into that scaling a bit soon, and then Rhiannon, I'll bring you into that to talk to us about Clue. Before we get there, I also want to talk to you, Alex, about your time at N26 and those early stages, and what Paulo has just talked about around getting product sales and your customers into the same room all the time. Can you go through your experience of those early days at N26? What was it like?
Yeah, you read my mind. I really wanted to share some of those, as it fit, I think, so well what Paulo was saying. So just for context, I joined N26 when we were 7 people. We had just pivoted, which we'll probably talk about towards the end. And we were sort of working towards our first customers. And so one day the founders approached me and say, Alex, we haven't really thought about customer service yet. Could you help us set that up, please? Because soon we'll have customers, and we just had one phone lying around somewhere in the room where if people were really like curious and looked for the phone number on our imprint, they could reach, and then I would usually answer it. Obviously, that was not super scalable when you started to in our first year then acquire 100,000 customers. And so what I then was doing was to set up customer service in a scalable way, which means we had chat, we had email, we had phone support, we had social media, and obviously also needed to build a team, because day one it was me talking to every customer that called us. And that was sort of, to Paulo's point, it was very cool because the head of product was sitting outside the door. And so when I got off the phone with a customer, I was like, hey, Marcus, this is what I just learned. And hey, can we please fix the bug over here with the Android notifications? That's really bugging here. 7 customers, I heard that today. And then these things get fixed extremely quickly. So there was sort of this going from initial very basic proposition that you bring to market to then within the first year refining what additional features, what comes next, and this sort of everyone's in the same room, and me and the head of product were very close friends, and well, became very close through that process, and just maintaining that overview. And then, I mean, we can talk about the challenges of scaling that, as obviously it was no longer just me answering the phone, but 20 people, and then over time you go to more markets and you have different requests from different countries, and how do you prioritize central versus decentral. But early days, I think, being close to the customer, everyone was getting on the phone, also proactively doing outreach, welcome calls from the founders to the CTO, like asking a customer how was the experience. I think that was hugely important in the first year to really understand, where to take the product from the initial entry point that got us started.
On that customer feedback sort of loop that you want to get into, like what are the questions what questions were you asking customers? What were you specifically trying to get out of them? What were the signals you were looking for that you were either A, onto the right thing, or B, needed to tweak the product?
Yeah, I think it depended a bit on the context. So for example, if you looked at the customer profile on what we knew, let's say they never really put money on the account, but they signed up, then you call them and say, hey, you signed up to N26 bank account last week, we saw you haven't yet put any money on there, do you have any questions on getting set up? And then you learn that they say, oh, I just forgot, or they say, actually, I'm not sure how to do it, right? So I think there's a lot to learn in the onboarding journey, where you try to call people that have not completed it by themselves and understand where's the friction coming from. And then once they're active customers and you see they actually only used the card once, for example, then you say, well, how was your experience with that? And so I think it's quite curious and context dependent. And then potentially you can always leave with a question, like in our case, over time, we knew the objective is to become the primary bank account, which of course at the beginning with this very simple feature set was probably no customer signed up and immediately transferred the salary. But then you say, well, is there anything missing that would, or are you considering to make this your salary account? Then you again learn what's holding them back. So those were maybe some of the methodologies that we used. I think just genuine curiosity, understanding where they stand, how they've used the product so far, and then taking it from there.
You're obviously operating as well in what has also become like a very competitive space in Europe. Like, how did that? There must have been a lot of not a lot of tension as you were trying to iterate the product and win customers. Like, how did that play out? Like, what conversations were happening around there to make sure that you were building the product that customers were going to go to over one of your competitors?
Honestly, I think fintech and neobanking became only competitive maybe in the last 4 to 5 years. I think when we started, at least even in Germany today, there's not really any competition. So I think in the beginning it was just amazing. It was this new category, right time, right place. Everyone's super frustrated with traditional banks, expensive, intransparent, no good mobile experience. And then we came in. And so I think that the first years were more characterized by we have too much demand, too many requests. How do you prioritize for maximum impact, as opposed to, oh, here are the 7 competitors doing all similar things, which very interesting position to have been in. And then only later it was more when internationalization, and you go to the UK and there you have Revolut and Monzo, and then you go to France and you have someone else. How do you then deal with certain competitors like that, and how do you differentiate? But big picture banking, such a huge market, even still today, most customers still with traditional branch-based banks, like there's still so much room to grow for digital banks. So I think that's a huge market, not so much competition, and the effort was really more on how do you prioritize for impact.
I want to kind of move on to the sort of maintaining product market fit, iterating, and then Rhiannon, bring you in as well. Before I do that, Rhiannon, Paulo, do you have anything to add to the conversation there?
No, let's move on.
Super, amazing. Maintaining product market fit. Obviously, Rhiannon, you've come into Clue, and presumably the work has gone into finding product market fit by the time you're there. But like, how are you maintaining that? How are you making sure that you are serving the customers you're supposed to be serving, and what's sort of happening and going through your mind in that case?
Yeah, and I think, Paulo already talked about this in terms of it's a never-ending story without the fluffy flying dog. But like, it's you can really easily lose it, and you can really easily lose, exactly as Alex and Paulo were saying, as you scale up, people get more and more disintermediated from the customer, or from the user, or from the person who you're hoping to serve. And when that disintermediation happens, that's when you start to drift away, and you start to, people and organizations think they know what they should be doing, and they think they know they have product market fit, but they can very easily have old assumptions, or, like, frankly, customers will always move faster than you can ever move. You can never really keep up with them. That's the joy of it, I think. And so even though you might have delivered a solution that works for them when you delivered it, they will be moving forward. When I joined Clue, we had a really interesting example of this, where we have millions and millions and millions and millions of people using the product every month worldwide. And the cool thing that they're doing is tracking their health. And we had a lot of feedback over years that people wanted to track more, that they wanted more in-depth ability to track, and they wanted more tracking options. And while we had a great advantage in simplicity and ease of use, it was sort of too simple, and people wanted more. And so we did this redesign, and we did this work, and we had to, did this big piece of work, and great, and we delivered more ability to track and deeper tracking, and we had tested that with people who want to track more, and that's great. But we had kind of lost, and when we shipped it, we saw instantly that those customers, or those users, were thrilled, and that there was a big group of users who we hadn't been spending enough time with, and we hadn't been talking to constantly, listening to, who we almost think about it as there's 2 distinct sets of users. There's the users who are the super trackers, who want to track everything. And then there are what we refer to as the Shazam users, right? They want to get in and put their data in and get their prediction and then get out. Like, they don't want to be in the product for a long time. And those folks were like, what have you done? This doesn't work for me at all. And so we had met the needs of, we'd made product market fit better with one significant chunk of our users, but we'd made it worse with another chunk of the users. And so we had to really dive deep into that and understand, well, why do you need to get in and get out so fast? Like, what are you trying to do? How do we meet the needs of user A, who just wants the Shazam use case, like, give me my prediction and I'll see you in a month. And then the user B use case, who wants to be in there every day and who wants to track 10, 15, 20 different things and really look at their patterns. And so that is and look, there is no fancy answer except what Alex and Paulo have been saying. And I'm completely, like, this is the one thing I have religion on, is you just have to talk to people over and over and over again. Like, we all talk to our users. I still talk to users every week. It doesn't matter what role you're in any company. You have to get on the phone or get on Zoom or go down the road or whatever it is, however you get in front of them, and just hear them and listen to them and see what they're wrestling with and what their problems are. And it's amazing how it's the best bit of the job, right? Like, that's why we're all here, is to solve problems for people. But it's amazing how you learn and you realize, oh, I thought I'd got XYZ done, but it's gone further. And in my previous role, I was at a company that made a cloud-based point of sale software, and we had an amazing example of this, where we had this very large customer. We mostly served small and medium retailers, so 1, maybe 2 stores, 3 stores, and we had one customer who had a lot of stores, and he's an amazing retailer based in New Zealand, so nobody on this call will have heard of him. a really brilliant retailer, built this amazing business, and he was kind of like he was not really who our ideal customer profile was, right? But we were a Kiwi company, he's a Kiwi retailer, he was kind of supporting us and in there and always pushing us because we just weren't quite good enough for what he needed. And he was very unhappy. And so I spent a lot of time with him and made sure the team spent a lot of time with him. And we would go on site with him, and we would go month after month, and I would call him every month. And we started to evolve the product, and we were starting to meet his needs. And then we were able to democratize what he needed because he was such a very clever, smart retailer and really help even smaller retailers, which is great. And one day we were on a call and he said to me, you know what? I was really unhappy with you all a year ago, and I was close to leaving, but you've really improved. You've really listened. Things are really good. And that's great. Great. But let me tell you what I'm doing now. And then proceeded to tell me about this like whole new thing that he was doing in his business that was really going to push retail forward. Very exciting. And that we were completely unprepared for in terms of serving and solving for, because you just like, we couldn't keep up. Like, you can never keep up with the people. Are always going to be doing what they need to do faster. And that's the joy of it. And if you're constantly listening to them and pushing and trying to keep up, that's how you'll constantly keep evolving and driving your own product market fit.
Can I add something to that? Rhiannon, I think she captured it perfectly. And one of the things that, like in my experience, worked really well for us in going through this process was to double click on that ICP. So when you thought that your ICP was discovered and you knew everything that you needed to know, suddenly you don't, right? And I think for me, like, there were two distinct experiences that I recall. One is I used to work at Dropbox in the B2B business, which is kind of like the unknown part of Dropbox. And as we moved from the SMB, which behaved almost like a B2C, into more the mid-market, what we realized is that the personas, the ICPs, started splitting, right? Like, a consumer is not, it's actually a complex persona, but it's just one person, right? It's the user, it's the buyer, it's the budget owner, it's the decision maker. But as you start growing, like, those people start splitting, right? Those are distinct people, and you need to come at them with very different messages. And I think part of maintaining your product market fit is about how do you adapt to that change. Like, as those personas evolve, are those personas split? Like, how are you tackling that? Like, are you being very conscious about it? Are you not? So for example, the way we did it at Vanta was to double click on those personas. Like, originally our persona is like founder that is selling up market. And then we started splitting, okay, is it a technical founder or a non-technical founder? And the pitch is different. The way we position the product is different because the value they get out of it is different. So when you start doing that, then you can go and start scaling those little two bubbles. And rather than you're trying to scale one bubble and you go slowly because you're double clicking a lot, then you can scale those bubbles really, really fast. And I think that is, tip for people that are listening to this and they're trying to figure out, okay, like, and I think I saw a question in the chat, is like, what happens if you feel that you've stalled? Well, if you feel that you've stalled, probably you need to do another double click because you're trying to scale up something that doesn't scale up anymore because you're actually solving two problems at once and you actually need to divide them.
I think that's great advice. And can I add a slightly controversial bit to that? I don't like personas at all, and I refuse to work with personas because I think it's a disintermediation again from the customer, and every time you're disintermediated. So essentially what Paulo was saying, I completely agree. But if you talk to your users and your customers, like that particular retailer who I mentioned, he's called Ricky, and we wouldn't have a persona we would have Ricky, right? And we would go see Ricky, and we would have transcripts from Ricky's interviews and from on-sites with Ricky, and know your actual customers and use a real customer instead of a persona, like someone who is a real human, who you've looked in the eyes and you've heard them tell you that they're disappointed in what you're doing and that you need to do better, or you've heard them say that, you've solved XYZ well for them, so that you really can touch and feel, and it's not ever I think the understanding the individual needs is so critical, and I've seen so many places go wrong where they use personas as almost an excuse to not go do the work of talking to people directly. I'm not saying that's what happened at Vanta, because clearly it's not. But it's so easy to sort of have a composite persona where you put bits together, but the people who we serve are never composites. They are real individual complex customers, and it's so critical.
I don't think it's controversial. I think it's just about how you set up that framework to go and engage with your customers, right? Like you need to figure out a way to do it. Like at a scale, probably personas is the best way that you can structure it. But then it's really about like you need to capture what your customers are telling you. Like, and you need to keep that constant listening mode and figure out like how do I not stop listening to this, and
how do I hear the real words? And this is why, I mean, I thought you were very bold when you said that it's okay for sales to a little oversell. I would always, in product roles, I'm like, if you oversell, I'm going to leave you hanging. And product managers go sit on those calls and listen to what the salespeople are hearing, and listen to when they get knocked back over and over again, and listen to the actual words of the objections, not just the, oh, we need X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
I think the point, you've got to like hear and touch and feel what your customers are.
I think I love that you said that about sales. I think it's it's one of those things that I originally, like, I'm a computer science grad, so I came from a product perspective, and honestly, I had a bit of allergy to salespeople. But when you actually start building that relationship, it's literally that listening mode that you're putting in the market, because it's way easier to scale that listening mode with, and I'm using sales, but I'm literally using go to market. So it's a bit what Alex mentions, like, is that customer success piece, is your support. Like, those people are constantly listening to your customers. You need to be completely plugged into that to understand, am I still doing the right thing by my customers? Are they evolving? Like, maybe my customers don't need this thing anymore, right? And I think that's when we get into like the next evolution of product market fit, where, who you served in the beginning is not who you serve anymore. And there's nothing wrong with that. You just need to be on the ball and understand that that is happening.
So I want to just pick up on that point, Paulo, and answer one of the audience questions we've had in it, which is, you've got sort of existing clients that have been around for a good number of years, but sort of sales cycles are getting longer. Those existing clients are plateauing, and how do you go about identifying how the market is shifting and how to adapt your product and services around that? Paulo, what's your experience of that at Vanta?
Actually, like, this is funny. This is actually the way I ended up working at Vanta. So when I came in first at Vanta, I came in as a consultant to help solve that very problem. Like, sales cycles were continually like getting longer, and the more salespeople you added didn't correlate with the more sales that you made. And that actually happens to every company. At some point, you're going to plateau or start plateauing, and you need to figure out what tends to be wrong. Like, my experience, that usually is because your personas or your customers evolve, right? Like, the person that you were selling to, it doesn't happen anymore. Like in the Vanta case, was that we were selling to founders. We had a perfect pitch for founders and they listened to us, but we were also starting to sell to first security people in a company, and their needs were completely different. For a founder, founders didn't have any clue about compliance. Like, hey, I don't know, I need you to help me, guide me through this process, because I don't know what this thing is. I just know that I have a customer that I want to sell to, and they're asking me for this. Like, just help me get a SOC 2 or an ISO 27001. I have no idea what it is. I'll figure it out as we go along, but this is something that I need to keep my business running. Whereas a first security engineer was like, no, I know what I'm doing. I know how I want to build a security program. I need to understand how your product helps me automate all this, so I can maximize my time, because I'm a solo team member. And that was essentially what was happening. Like, we realized that our sales cycles were not stable because we were selling in the same way to two very different personas. And the moment we picked that up, and we started like almost splitting those sales processes into two distinct sales processes and treating them in a very unique way. And I think this is what Rhiannon is really trying to like capture. It's like, listen deeply to your customers. And if you listen deeply to your customers, you will be able to understand what they want. You adapt to that. And then suddenly you have a plateau in sales curve, and then you split it in two, and then you have two that continue going up really well. And then you will hit another plateau at another point, but that's great, because like, it tends to happen like rarely, but it's actually incredibly dangerous for companies, because if you don't realize that that is going on, and if you're not able to double click and really understand, okay, this is not efficient anymore, how do I do it? You may actually get in a situation where you plateau, when you're really, what you're hitting is a valley, and then you pick up again.
Alex, I want to bring you in for an investor point of view on a question we've had from another audience member, which is, company there, they sort of empower people to build the company that they've always wanted. So they follow their passion, their calling in life, and that's what they build a business around. How important do you think it is, and this is based on what you've seen as an investor, how important do you think a founder's sort of personal mission is in building a successful business? And how do you balance that with then sort of market demand and customer need?
I think it's hugely important, actually, because I think that, ideas 5%, execution is 95%. So one's determination, founder determination to solve a problem that probably they've experienced, and therefore it was such a big problem for them that they make it their life's mission. That's exactly the kind of founders that you want to back, because even if the first idea is maybe not the right one and so on, if they will eventually get there, right? And so I think for sure it's one of the main questions in an early stage investment is the team and why they started the company. Like, that's it. And then the rest is almost checking the boxes, but that is really like the decisive thing to look out for, and the determination over the long term, I think, comes from, are you building something that you truly feel connected to on a personal level.
Amazing. I want to move into this. I know we've kind of touched on this as well already with the sort of that maintaining PMF, and then it fits obviously into your business as you scale. So, Rhiannon, I want to talk to you about this bit. Sort of talk to us about your experience at Clue, and how important is it at the sort of stage where you're scaling to really get distribution right?
Yeah, I mean, distribution is the unsexy bit of marketing and the actual marketing mix, but honestly, distribution is where the blood is on the floor in every single business model. And frankly, for all that we talk about, and we're all here because we're software and digital internet enabled businesses, and it's distribution that has been so radically changed by technology fundamentally. So if you think about like the one thing that in every business model I've ever worked in has been true, is margin accrues to the point of control, right? So if you think about like, what is the point of control in your business model, and what is the point of control in your distribution model? If you think about from an app point of view, who owns distribution and who owns the point of control? In our world, Apple and Google, right? So we cannot get to market, we cannot get to our users without going through them. And so they own and control distribution. And so the ability to like win in the app stores is you cannot scale a consumer app without that. And unfortunately or fortunately, it's a very difficult, complex thing, and it's not just about money. None of them are transparent around what's going on in the algorithms. And so, for example, very interestingly, in the summer in the US, Procter & Gamble spent literally millions and millions on advertising a free period tracking app that they have. They got loads of downloads, but it didn't even move in the lists, right? Like the distribution and understanding what is your distribution mechanic, can you scale that, can you get in front of people, is the thing that makes a business long-term sustainable or not. And so many businesses have products where they do solve a problem, and when people know about it or find or use that product, they enjoy it and it does the job for them, but they don't know about it or they can never find it. And if you can't solve that, like if you don't have that product market distribution fit, then you'll never be able to scale and never get, there's a question in there around like from 100 customers, how do you get to 1,000? Yeah, how do you find them? Where are they? What is your mechanic for getting to them? And you have to figure that out at the same time that you're figuring out the product market fit, because otherwise you can't do it. It's just simply, it just becomes a mathematical impossibility. And so for us, for example, the app stores and being able to, we spend a lot of time thinking about and energy around like, where are we in the app store? What goes into each single country and every single listing and every single word and every single image, and testing and testing and learning and testing and learning, and like, just as product market fit changes, distribution changes as well, and distribution channels wear out, or you suddenly lose fit, or something changes because you're dependent on some other way of getting to people, and that becomes incredibly critical to the success of the business.
I can see you nodding throughout that. What would you add?
Yeah, there's I think, I mean, I come from a slightly different side, because like I'm mostly on the B2B side, but the challenge is exactly the same. It's really about how do you scale, and like there's so much that you can do yourself and that you own, but then there's like a massive amount that is not really under your control. It's a distribution channel, right? And this is like a classic commerce problem. Like, we're not inventing it in technology. It happened in the 16th century too. It's like, you know, if you own the shipping lines, then you control distribution, right? Like, there's like, it's not rocket science. But like, for example, things that people need to think about is you really need to be thinking about what are your next distribution channels, like, and is this going to help me achieve my product market fit, or can I actually enhance it with my distribution channel? So like, for example, at Vanta, we mostly sell direct, but we also use channel partners. And these are third parties that are usually good security business practices, and they sell software on top, right? As part of an offering to a customer. Now, when we started looking into that, we realized that we were a fantastic fit for them, because we help them automate things that they need to do with humans, offer a great service for their customers, reduce their cost, and their margins go up. They're like, all right, fantastic. Like, these people are going to jump on board to help us distribute, because we're actually solving a problem for them as we do that. And we solve a problem for their customers. So that's kind of like where it gets really tricky, because it's not a two-person game. It now becomes a throuple. And you need to make sure that everybody in the throuple is really happy about the relationship with each other. And that is really complex, right? Because it's not about, okay, I deliver great value for my customer. That is fantastic. But if you're not delivering great value to the intermediary, then you have a problem, because the intermediary doesn't care, like, doesn't give a damn about you. And then they're not going to help you distribute, right? So for me, that is something that people should be thinking about. Like, when you're at that product market fit, when you're starting to scale, things are working, and you can control your own sales destiny with your own marketing and your own sales team, you also need to be thinking about, okay, what's the next level of scale, right? And, you know, channel distribution, so selling through third parties, or partnership distribution, or in the case of the B2C, like the app distribution, you need to be thinking about those problems and how do they affect your PMF, and how do you play with them.
Alex, before I come to you to talk to us about, or to add stuff to this part of the conversation with your N26 lens, I want to ask from an investor point of view, what are the most common mistakes that you've seen companies make at this point?
Yeah, I think too often is there an over-reliance on paid marketing. So there's essentially like not really like product market fit. We haven't really touched on maybe certain metrics that really indicate that you've reached that a bit later on. And so maybe to share a few from my perspective is, I mean, everything in growth starts with retention and engagement, right? Like, if you have customers that leave you, or that you're like, I have a leaky bucket, and you keep pouring more in at the top, that won't work. So the first thing always is, you know, what does your retention look like, and how does that benchmark to peers in the industry? That's sort of, for me, always the starting point to evaluate like the health of a company. Why is retention so important? Because if you have you know, retained customers, you have a longer lifetime with them. That means you have more opportunities also for monetization over the lifetime with them. Likely there are more referral touch points. Like, if they're a happy customer longer, they will refer more friends. So retention is really the thing that lifts everything up. So for me, that's the starting point. What is retention compared to peers in the industry? The second one is also then, of your new customers, how many are organic and referred customers? That's also always a strong indication of product market fit. And then I look at NPS essentially as well, right? So that you have a feeling like qualitatively how happy are your customers. Then from the actions, you know, how long are they staying, and are they actually referring their friends? So if those are there, you know, then I think you have a strong foundation to invest also in paid marketing and in other sort of channels, where you can then better control sort of the LTV to CAC ratios, when you say, okay, how much am I layering on top? So those are things that we would look at a bit more later stage investments where product market fit is there, traction is there, and it's about scaling. It's like, how can it scale? What's your LTV to CAC? And often retention is the key element that unlocks that.
How obsessed did you become with these metrics at N26? Like, how did that play out during your operating days?
Yeah, well, importantly, I think that when I ran the growth team there was a similar collaboration as Paulo described with the growth organization, which had marketing and internationalization, and the product organization, because obviously retention is something that's heavily influenced also by the product. So there's a very strong collaboration between sort of my organization was more the customer facing go-to-market organization, and then you have the product organization. So understanding, what are customers saying, why are people churning, feeding that back, having product teams sort of closely working on that. If the retention then goes up, it unlocks me to do more in marketing because, lifetime value has increased. So we always had a very, very important look at these metrics, more on a sort of quarterly, half-yearly basis, that they don't change overnight. But that determines then your investment appetite in a given market for a given product, because your LTV to CAC ratios are changing depending on also how the product is improving, how retention is changing. So hugely important in bit more the strategic cycles, and then in the weekly you have a set sort of, okay, this is the maximum CAC within the quarter based on roughly the LTV and retention metrics. So then let's optimize that, channel experimentation up and down. But that's sort of the ceiling of the CAC we can accept in a given quarter, for example.
Paulo, Rhiannon, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, we're obsessive about these metrics. The joy of having so much data is you can be obsessive about it. And I mean, Alex is right. Retention is one of those things that's incredibly powerful, but because it's powerful, it's not a fast lever. It takes a long time. You can lose retention quite quickly, but it takes a long time when you're trying to work on it, to improve it and to see that. And we also track very obsessively, because we're primarily a consumer subscription, for example. I'm constantly looking at like what subs are coming up for renewal, how many have cancelled in the run up to renewal, then how many make it over the renewal hump. And we look at that, weekly as well as monthly, as well as quarterly, and then half yearly, and then look at cohort trends, because it is the lifeblood of the business. And, the thing with anything that involves, like, retention is a compounding benefit, right? So the more retention you have, the more the business compounds in terms of its goodness. The thing with compounding is that, you're compounding on the way up, but you're also compounding on the way down if it goes the wrong way. So you really can't ever take your eye off that ball.
I think the only thing I would add is that, like, both on the B2C and the B2B world, I think it works exactly the same way, right? It's like the metrics are the same. The way you look at it is the same. Having been at Dropbox, where I've seen both sides in the same company, which is a bit weird and very unique. I think a couple of learnings for me. One is something that one of our PMs used to say, which I thought it was very brutal, but very realistic, is that consumers are ruthless. They can change their mind and they'll move on. Whereas in the B2B side, you have a bit more control, but like on the consumer side, it's way more difficult. So I think that is something that I would take into account if I'm doing a B2C or a B2B startup. Is like that focus on retention. I think it's much more impactful in the early days on the B2C side that is on the B2B side. I think you have more opportunities to make up for what you're not doing well on the B2B side than you do on the B2C. So that's for me one learning going through that process that could be useful for the audience on that regard.
So I want to spend the sort of last portion, 10 minutes or so of the conversation talking about when do you pivot? When do you either go in a completely different direction, or when do you sort of make quite significant tweaks to the product you're trying to sell into the market? I want to start with you, Alex, on this. And can you tell us about your experience of that at N26? What did you do? What was that story?
Yeah, maybe happy to start with the N26 story, and then maybe a bit the zoomed out lens on what is the overall learnings there. But I mean, this was sort of around about the time I joined. So I initially applied and was thinking I'd join a company called Papaya back in 2014. And then I arrived on September 1st, and the founders tell me, yeah, you know what? Yesterday we shut down Papaya and we're now building something called Number 26. And I was curious and intrigued and said, okay, well, how come, what happened? And they said they were running like a friends and family test for the Papaya. They had built the product. So there was what was Papaya? It was a prepaid card for teenagers where the parents had an app that was connected in real time with this card. And so they said, well, we had 50 friends and family and we tested it over the summer, and all the parents didn't even give the card to their kids. They used it themselves because they loved the connection between the app and the card, which, in 2014 was unheard of. Like no bank was doing any real-time transaction. There was no app, there was nothing. And so they said, well, interesting, we are onto something much, much bigger than we thought. We are actually in the business of building a modern bank account for everyone, not just the teenage niche, because the learning was that even the grown-ups, all they wanted essentially was a MasterCard to pay, an app that is, in real time connected with it. And then we had to add a bank account for direct debits and bank transfers, not just a prepaid card. And so we then evolved the product to also include that in the background where you can make, SEPA transfers and stuff like that. And then, rebranded and relaunched, pivoted to the number 26 proposition. That was then the modern bank account for grown-ups, not the teenage niche. So I think there the learning was, maybe that, well, of course, some parents gave it to the kids and the kids liked it as well, right? But the bigger learning was that you're onto something much, much bigger, and that there's a strong demand in maybe a market that you initially had thought is way too big to go after, or you maybe, you don't in 2014, you didn't just say, I start a bank from scratch, maybe because, fintech wasn't a thing at the time. And so I think that sort of was zooming out this friends and family phase. That's why that's so important. And that's why I said also in the very beginning of the conversation, it's a discovery process. This is something that you have to pay attention to. You talk to all these customers and they reveal to you, oh, actually, I use it myself. And that's an insight you would never have expected in testing the kids card, right? And so I think that's to Rhiannon's point as well. And you need to always talk to the customers continuously. And so that was a bit the story of how N26 became actually N26.
That's so great. Paulo, I can see you smiling at that. What would you add?
Yeah. I think, from a pivoting perspective, I think there's two ways to do it, especially when you've reached a certain scale. Right? Like in the very early days, I think Alex's example is incredible. When you've reached a certain scale, I think there's two ways you can approach this. Is the evolutionary way. It's like, hey, am I tapping all the markets that I could be tapping? Should I move into another country? Should I move into another region? Or am I focusing on the lower end of the market and I should just gradually serve the needs of bigger companies? I think those are evolutionary ways of reaching product market fit, and they tend to be super easy. Super easy, because you can see it is there. You can see the potential. Your business really well. Your metrics, your distribution channels, your personas, and you can see that there's something adjacent that you can touch, and you're like, all right, we can go there. I think the most difficult one is the revolutionary pivot, right? Like the one where, okay, we are doing this thing, and now we're doing this other thing that it's not directly correlated, or if it is, it is in a weird way. Like those take a very bold approach from companies, and I think that's kind of like usually what tends to give you your act two, right? Like you have your first successful product, and then you go and build your second successful product. And I think there's great examples of that in the industry, but it tends to be a very risky move, and something that you usually go and spin off a small team to go and work on that. So for example, at Vanta, one of the things that we've been working on is we've realized that we are really good at helping people that are small companies prove trust to bigger companies, and we kept evolving that, and now we help even bigger companies from that startup into the SMB, into the mid-market. But the enterprise always seemed very far from us, just because their needs are like humongous, and you would need an incredibly big product team to go and build that. However, because they actually have that requirement of proving trust for smaller teams, there's an opportunity for us to bring that knowledge into the enterprise, but with a completely different product. And that's one of the things that we are trying to do now. It's like, hey, instead of doing a compliance product, can we do a third-party risk management product for the enterprise that almost capitalizes on our strengths, but attacks the problem in a completely different way? And I think those things are very interesting pivots, and they're risky because you don't know if it's going to work out. You kind of like have an inclination and you can see potential, but they are way riskier than that evolutionary of, okay, let me expand to a new country where I probably my playbook will work 70 to 90%, and that is quite effective.
Rhiannon, that resonates with you, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I was just thinking as you were saying that and reflecting that perhaps uncharitably, a lot of my career has been coming into organizations after folks have tried that and realizing that actually really doubling down on the core advantage and the core benefit and the core solution that you offer is the way to grow the business. And you know that this I have seen a pattern in many companies where that plateau that Paulo described happens, and so the company thinks, well, we need to pivot, we need to do, they come up with a big exciting thing that is really quite far from the value that their customers want, and they go for it and it doesn't actually work. You know, the risk that he's calling out there happens, and then often I've come in kind of after that and been like, okay, how do we actually get back to the core and not sort of losing sight of the benefit of the core? I worked on quite a famous product that at one point, you know, I remember people were like, well, we're a utility and we have to be beyond that. And I'm like, the power of being a utility and being on everybody's phone and being something that everybody wants, my God, you don't give that up, you know, like, and how do you make that even more sticky and mean that you are, you know, the utility that everybody will have forever and always? Like, really understanding the core advantage, they can work and they often don't. And I think Paulo's call out is really great. Like, it's really risky and you have to be really sure that you haven't got more to go in your core benefit that people want from you.
If I can add up to what you just said, I think you've described it perfectly. It's about, you need to have that humming engine that will actually allow you to take the risk, right? Because like if you can make that original engine hum and like work really well for you, you will have a business model that scales, that can allow you to go and say, okay, I'm going to take 10% of my resources and I'm going to take a risky bet because the other 90% are fueling this business that operates incredibly well. And I think that is the position where you want to be in, where you have like this thing that's, it's incredible, it scales, you can move to adjacent opportunities and it just keeps moving. And then you're like, all right, cool, let me try this other thing that's a bit riskier, but I can finance it with this business that operates very efficient. I think that would be the perfect scenario for taking that risk for me.
Amazing. I am gonna wrap things up. We are just about at time. Thank you to everyone in the audience who did come along, and sorry if we didn't manage to get to your question. Thanks to our amazing panelists, and thank you also to our partner Vanta for their support. Yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's been absolutely super. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who came along. I would also like to let you know about Sifted's free subscription for startups across Europe, Sifted for Startups, which offers free unlimited access to our journalism. So please search Sifted for Startups for more information on that. And for any upcoming Sifted talks, you can find those on sifted.eu/talks, and follow the link that we are about to drop into the chat box just now. So thanks ever so much to everyone again. Alex, Rhiannon, Paulo, thank you so much. And everyone, take care.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for having us. Bye.